What's up guys, Bobgar here, and it is wrap-up time for $10 White Knights. We ended up going 4-1, which is really good. We lost our first game, and then it looked like we might lose our second game. I think our opponent actually might have scooped a little early, but it was starting to look like we might have a shot just because we had the indestructibility lock, and I don't think he runs all that many paths. He did have one or two, but not super many, and I think we might have had it just because we had so much life gain. But yeah, either way, the end record was 4-1, so we'll take it. I had a really fun time playing the deck. It did feel a little fragile at times. It felt like we were winning by the skin of our teeth, but aggro decks often feel like that, especially creature aggro decks. You just never know when your opponent's going to have a sweeper or a removal spell, and some of our creatures take a little bit of investment, which makes them a little bit weak to both removal and sweepers. Especially, I think, Student of Warfare is a little weak to single target removal just because you have to invest a bunch of mana into him, and same with Silverblade Paladin. That's also Silverblade Paladin's problem because you link him to somebody, you swing with two people going, my opponent doesn't have good blocks, you know, him and the person he's linked to, and then your opponent removes one of the two, and then suddenly you lose double strike and it becomes a bad attack for you. So they have a few issues like that. Let's look at the overperformers and underperformers. So I had a really hard time choosing the underperformers, and I don't think they are actually really bad in the deck. Let me start by saying that. I think Thraben Inspector was a little slow, and he's not a knight, so it felt bad that he didn't get the indestructibility and the other bonuses from Knight Exemplar. I don't know what else I would play in his spot, but he did feel like he might have been the weakest of our cards. That and then Journey to Nowhere. Journey to Nowhere is not bad, but it's, you know, very obvious to you that you're playing a sorcery speed 2-mana removal spell where almost everybody else playing the game is playing 1-mana instant speed removal in either Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt or Path to Exile. So it doesn't feel great. But it was useful a few games. It's just a little bit clunky. So again, it's not a bad choice. It was a choice we had to make because it was a budget deck, but it's probably one of the underperformers. And then finally, Knight of the Holy Nimbus. This is probably the one I feel worst about putting on the list, but he just didn't do as much for us as I had hoped. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we didn't run into sweepers and that we didn't even run into that much single target removal outside of Path. And that's where he really shines. The fact that he costs 3 to remove with single target removal and often 6 to remove with things like Supreme Verdict. That makes him a really sticky target, and you know, you equip a Bonesplitters to him, he becomes a 4-2 with flanking that makes his opponent smaller. He gets out of hand, but we never really got into those situations with him, so that's why he's an underperformer here. And then our overperformers, I don't think these are too surprising given the games that we played. Knight Exemplar is our only lord. She gives all our knights indestructible, and she did what she was supposed to do. In fact, one of the games our opponents had a wrath, and it meant that only our Knight Exemplar died, and the rest of our knights got to keep living, so that won us that game. So yeah, she definitely performed very well. She was either removed immediately because she was seen as a huge threat, or she did her job really well, buffed our team, and a lot of times saved the bigger knights with her indestructibility. I was talking a little bit earlier about how some of her knights are fragile, and she makes it feel a lot safer to go in on those kind of fragile threats because she keeps them safe. She protects your whole team. Knight of the White Orchid got a check mark because there were a few games where we started off with 1 mana, and I said, well, I have a Thraben Inspector, so if I get to 2 mana, I can get a draw off that. And also, if I get to 2 mana and I'm behind on mana, I can play Knight of the White Orchid and get to 3. And this deck really only needs about 3 mana. And a lot of those games, I ended up with 5 or 6 by the end anyway. But he allowed us to play with low mana. I mean, this deck is not a high land deck. I think we're running 21. I think 21 is about the right number. I don't think you want to go any lower. I mean, at the end of some of the games, we were a little flooded, especially against Control, where they killed all our threats, and we're like, well, we're going to draw some lands, and when we draw those, it feels really bad. But you do need some lands in your deck. You can't go much lower than 21. But Knight of the White Orchid basically makes it so you can play a low number of lands for a deck like this and feel a lot better about it. It helps you catch back up. And then finally, Hero of Bladehold. This just flat out won games if it was left on the board. It wasn't left on the board very often, but when it was left on the board, on the backswing, it just does so much damage, especially if you have an Honor the Pure out or something like that, and you're swinging in for 4 off the hero and 6 off the tokens because the hero itself is an Anthem on a stick that has Battle Cry. So yeah, I thought she was really good. A lot of the other cards were really good, but were also a little hit or miss. I don't know if we actually played a Mirran Crusader. I only added it about halfway through when I realized the prices had lowered on the deck, and it was down to about 8 or something, or $9, and I was like, I really had wanted to put a Mirran Crusader in here. Actually, I'd wanted to put two. I wanted the split to be 2 Mirran Crusaders and 2 Silverblades. Silverblades sometimes are better, but they're much more fragile, and Mirran Crusader does more on his own, and I think the modern metagame right now has a lot of removal in it. A lot of people are excited to play with their fatal pushes, which just got printed, and they're pretty cheap, and they're still in standard, so a lot of people have those. And then Path to Exile also just took a huge price hit because it was reprinted in Modern Masters 2017. So I think we're seeing more decks with those in them, which makes it so that going in on things like Silverblade Paladin and Student of Warfare are even slightly more punishing than they were before, just because people like to play with good cards, and they're now affordable enough to do, and so a lot of people bought into those cards. But yeah, overall, I mean, obviously I was pretty happy with the deck. It went 4-1, which I was really impressed with. I was expecting more like a 2-3 or a 3-2, but it really did hold its own against some pretty good decks. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about some upgrade suggestions for the deck. I like to do this every time. Some of the obvious ones are, hey, we can make our guys uncounterable and put them out faster. So Aether Vial helps with both of those. And then Cavern of Souls, we're mono white in this build, but it helps us get our guys out uncounterably. Like I just mentioned, we'd rather be running Path to Exile than Journey to Nowhere. That's not really a surprise. Just a better card. If we're going to run an equipment, it probably makes more sense to run something like Sword of Fire and Ice than it does to run Bonesplitters, although they both are pretty good and they both have their place. Bonesplitters is nice that it's cheap and effective, but if we have things like Aether Vial to get our creatures out, we can afford to spend a little bit more on our non-creature spells, like Sword of Fire and Ice, to put it out and equip it. Also makes it a little easier to warrant pumping mana into Student of Warfare, since you can keep putting creatures out with Aether Vial while you do that. And if we were going to go if we were going to go a second color, the color I would probably choose is green. That's partly because Knight of the Reliquary is probably the most famous and best knight in Magic, and I think could be very strong in our deck if we had fetch lands. It gets +1/+1 for each land card in your graveyard. If you're running fetch lands, it's usually at least a few. It's a 2/2 by default, and it has sacrifice a forest or plain, search your library for a land card, put it into play, then shuffle your library. So you can also just get the lands you need off of her and cycle through lands to make her bigger. Wiltleaf Liege, I'm a little less sure of unless you change the deck around a little, but it's a knight, so it works well with the tribal synergies. And it's also another lord, because it gives all your green and white creatures +1/+1, which is really powerful. I don't think you want to run a lot of her, and I'm not convinced that she's better than Hero of Bladehold. But if you tilt more towards green-white and take Knight of the Reliquary and maybe another green-white knight or two, I could see them being Wiltleaf Liege being really good in the deck. And then finally, we're running a ton of 2 and 3 drops. It feels like a good Collected Company deck. I don't think I've actually tried it as a Collective Company deck, but I feel like that could be a good spot for it to be in. Maybe go down to either 2 Wiltleaf Liege or 2 Hero of Bladehold and go up 4 Collected Companies. Maybe even go up some more of the 3 drops, because in Collected Company decks, you really, if you can, you want to be hitting 3 drops, because you'd like to pay 4 mana for 2 3 drops if possible. And we have some good 3 drops, so I'm sure you could build the deck a little bit more around that and have it be really strong. So those are the upgrade suggestions I would look at. That's how I would look into it. I don't think Knights is ever going to be a top tier tribal deck. I mean, I don't think it has enough tools in its tribal group to be as strong as something like Merfolk. But all that being said, I still think it's a pretty strong and a pretty fun tribe. Probably top 10, within the realm of top 10 tribes in Magic. Obviously, it's not as good as Elves either. There's a bunch of other tribes that are just, kind of edge it out. I think Humans is probably slightly stronger, although that's getting closer to the right level of comparison. But Knights are certainly fun, and they certainly are a viable deck in Modern if you're okay with being tier 2 or 3 and having a few bad matchups. They definitely have the disadvantage that they're a little slower than some other aggro-y tribal decks, and that leads them to being a little bit more susceptible to sweepers, although at least they do have a lord that gives them indestructibility, which gives them a little bit of ability to survive past the sweepers. And like I said, Knight of the Holy Nimbus can help with that too, although I suspect with a higher budget deck, that's probably one of the knights you very well might cut, at least into the sideboard. And that's the deck for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed the games, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching. Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.